Crime victimization, from a sociological perspective, creates a need, and the social institution that we've built to address that need is the legal system. To that end, the law provides certain remedies. The primary remedies that the law provides in criminal cases are fines and prison time. But the needs of crime victims, particularly victims of severe, violent, interpersonal crime, align against an emotional backdrop. They have therapeutic needs, they also have financial needs, but they have emotional needs that the system doesn't meet. The losses that are most harmful to victims are those that are intangible: loss of dignity, loss of personal integrity, loss of a lifelong companion. Property losses can be recouped, and physical wounds will heal, but these are what the law addresses, the corpus that grants one access to legal remedies. Crime victims ultimately do not feel restored by legal remedies. Restorative justice is one of the ways that we can bridge the disconnect between what victims need and what legal remedies can provide. Some of the major flaws of the legal system include the fact that the system, at least in the US, is not based on truth-seeking. It's not a system that's designed to find truth. It's a system that's designed to evaluate facts. And as a lawyer, if I present my facts in a way that's more credible or more believable to you, even if it's a complete set of lies, and I then succeed over the other attorney who's presenting another set of facts in the case, then I win. And we think, supposedly, out of that adversarial system, that some kind of truth emerges. But it's not a system designed to seek truth. It's also not victim-oriented. The state steps into the shoes of the victim in criminal cases so that the victim isn't even a party to her own case. And it's not designed to restore real injury, and accountability on behalf of the offenders is not required. So, aside from the fact that the remedies that the law provides don't suit the ultimate needs of victims, the key failings of the legal system are part of what undermines the victim's ability to find resolution in the law. Restorative justice approaches to crime attempt to respond to victim needs. Restorative justice shifts the focus from the violation to victim repair. It requires offender accountability, and it views crime as a breach of community, and then the obligation of the offender is to repair that breach. It also recognizes that the reintegration of the offender depends on successful repair of harm and the trust of the community, not simply by serving time. Most of you already know what restorative justice is about. Restorative justice, by my definition, includes some of these basic components. It's voluntary on both sides. It's post-adjudication, meaning it happens after some sort of legal resolution is determined, so guilt or innocence has already been determined. The goal is relief for the victims, not necessarily punishment. Again, offender accountability. Forgiveness by victims is not necessary, and it's also not necessarily an aspiration of the process, and remorse is not required by the offender, but accountability is. Going back to the initial divergence of victim needs and legal remedies, we can see that the law doesn't offer the kind of remedies that the victim needs. Rather than promoting acknowledgement of wrongdoing, the legal system encourages offenders to claim innocence as the best legal strategy. Rather than requiring offender accountability, lawyers are trained to counsel their clients to avoid responsibilities. In fact, that's one of the core legal obligation of any professional is zealous advocacy. And attempting to get your client off is considered a successful representation. Also, rather than preserving an historical record of the victim's experiences that memorializes the full magnitude of what he or she has experienced, the law prefers plea bargains. They undermine truth-seeking because plea bargains are, by definition, bargains. They represent less than what actually happened to the victim, and that's the story that's recorded in the public record. That's what serves for all time of what the victim suffered. Rather than requiring apology, the law advises against undertaking personal responsibility even after the case is over and guilt has been determined. From a criminological perspective, crime is all about offenders. They focus almost exclusively on offender behavior, not crime victims. They usually suffer from rational choice influences, which is what the deterrence-based system of policymaking is about. And they emphasize consequences and punishment for criminal behavior. Criminologists attempt to use patterns of human behavior to explain crime in order to prevent it. But what psychology tells us is that human behavior is often irrational, illogical, and unpredictable, and therefore even what appears to have a rational basis is really unreliable. Sometimes human behavior cannot be accurately or adequately explained. But to deal with crime and victimization in a meaningful way, do we really need to be able to explain it? A more practical approach is to shift the focus away from offenders and explaining offender behavior and examine what the victim experiences and attempt to restore that. We're never going to have crime rates at zero, and once we accept that that's a given, then it becomes something to manage, and the way that we manage it today is unsustainable. In the U.S., by warehousing offenders, we're simply throwing money away and creating better offenders. So we have to start shifting away from deterrence, away from rational choice-based theories, and shifting more towards resolution for victims. So the question becomes, what are we trying to achieve? One of the things that we're trying to achieve is victim healing. The overriding goal of the system should be to leave people who've been harmed by crime feeling better. The goal is an emotional resolution, which doesn't mean we don't punish people or we don't fine them, because in some circumstances those may be appropriate remedies, but they aren't the only remedies. We can't limit ourselves to simply dealing with the offender without examining what happens to the victims. In psychology and cognitive neuroscience, there is a growing recognition that PTSD that flows out of crime victimization can be remediated by certain kinds of approaches, and those are the approaches that restorative justice approaches take. One of the key features of restorative justice is to reaffirm shared community values by repairing the relationships that are central to the community. Restorative justice views crime as a breach of community, and community is made up of relationships. So, even though the relationships among the parties to the crime have to be examined and aired and the grievances dealt with, after that process, through some sort of restorative justice model, the victim and the offender then return to the community, because part of the process of reintegration is necessary to avoid the warehousing that we're doing now, which isn't working. So, what would it look like if we had a victim justice system as opposed to a criminal justice system? For one thing, we would demand offender accountability for actual harms as well as moral harms. We would serve crime victims, not some process of meaningless retribution. We would reject the idea that crimes are violations against the state or against society, and the idea that punishments should be determined by the state, and instead we'd call for active participation by victims as well as offender participation. We would also favor an orientation of legal response that was suited to the actual harm, not resorting to plea bargains which lower the charge. And finally, we would reject deterrence approaches, because we've discovered, in the US anyway, that those approaches simply aren't working. Okay, and that's it.